Chapter 1251, We're no longer as we have been. Gu Xiaoxue summed up the report in her mind first and then reported the situation of Tang Xiu's parents and the Tang family in the past 3 years. After Grandmaster's parents took the precious elixirs 2 years ago, their physiques were remolded and their cultivations have been rapidly progressing since. Especially after they went to the pocket world 6 months ago, after which their strength skyrocketed. Both of them have advanced to the nascent soul stage, and it won't take long before they break through to the spirit formation stage. The cultivation progress of the Tang family isn't slow, but it's much worse compared to Grandmaster's parents. Most of them are at the golden core stage, although their mood is slightly worse. Master has arranged the heart tempering array, so the rest of Tang family have entered the array and are cultivating inside it. Having said that, she hesitated for a moment and then said, Our Tang sect is developing quickly and most of the children army have also advanced to the golden core stage. A few of them have even reached the nascent soul stage. Aside from that, we've taught all 49 army formations, and they can definitely crush any enemies with similar numbers and cultivation levels. Additionally, there are 2 people in the Tang sect whom I think needs further evaluation and appreciation since their cultivation levels have surpassed mine, Tang Guang's, and Tang An's. Huh? Tang Xiu was surprised and asked, Who are they? Gu Yin and Little Blind, Gu Xiaoxue answered. Tang Xiu recalled their special physiques and immediately asked, What cultivation level have they reached? Both have reached the body integration stage, Gu Yin at the mid-stage and Little Blind at the early stage. Tang Guang has once sparred with Little Master and Gu Yin, and he has been defeated badly, Gu Xiaoxue added. A smile climbed up on Tang Xiu's face as he nodded. Their progress is really wonderfully fast, though I've long been expecting it. Anyway, brief me about the rest as well. Gu Xiaoxue recalled for a while and then said, Blind Grandma has broken through to the Celestial Master stage. Compared to the cultivation art we provide here, her power is comparable to experts at the body integration stage. Master Uncle Qin Jizhong, on the other hand, has advanced to the late stage of body integration. What about Shuiyu, where's she now? Asked Tang Xiu. I have no news about her, Gu Xiaoxue said. Tang Xiu nodded slowly and then said, I give you 3 days to bring all Tang sect disciples from all over the world back to Nine Dragons Island. Now that the embryonic form of the Tang sect's force has begun to take shape, it's time for me to reorganize the sect's army. Understood. Gu Xiaoxue looked bewildered, but she nodded and complied. In the palace. Right after Tang Xiu and Gu Xiaoxue entered the palace, a fragrant scent greeted them, and the now young-looking Su Lingyun came floating in front of them. Xiu, Yan. Su Lingyun's smiling face was especially bright. Even though they all had been staying on Nine Dragons Island, she only met Tang Xiu once when he left the exquisite pagoda twice in the past 3 years. Mom. Tang Xiu's dream once upon a time was to bring and help his mother embark on the cultivation path. Now that he saw his mother looking so brilliant, elegant, and full of vigor, he couldn't help but feel a bit moved. Su Lingyun smiled, pulled Gu Yan's hand and said, You children keep staying in that exquisite pagoda all the time. I've always been wanting to see you there, but Yunde never let me. He said that I'll disturb your cultivation. But well, you've been living with him for 3 years there, why haven't you conceived a child? Come again? Tang Xiu was dumbstruck, but Gu Yan blushed and lowered her head wordlessly. Yan, Xiu is rather thin-skinned and his head is always full of cultivation. I know this brat has accomplished big things and his enterprise is very important. But he's grown up already, getting married and having a family is equally important. If he doesn't take the initiative, you've got to be the one who seizes it. And don't speak about seniority to me, what age are we living in now? So long as you're perfectly suited and agreeable, I don't think it's a problem for you both to get married and have children. Gu Yan suppressed her embarrassing feelings and tilted her head to glance at Tang Xiu. Blushing, she lowered her head and said, I'll definitely seize the initiative, Auntie. Since you're going to seize the initiative, then you must address me as mother from now on, got it? Su Lingyun happily said. Cough, cough, cough. Tang Xiu couldn't help but cough. He didn't even have the chance to speak up and almost choked. Gu Yan was his disciple, yet his mother only needed one line to mess up the seniority ranks in the family all at once. Mom. Please don't make up such a messed up notion about us getting married, Tang Xiu said, but he immediately swallowed the rest of his words after glancing at Gu Yan, whose expression abruptly changed drastically. Su Lingyun fiercely glared at him and pretended to be angry. What's wrong? You don't want to listen to your mother anymore since your cultivation is great or something? Do you not think that Yan is a good child? She's been with you for so many years, and she's definitely a great and hard-to-find daughter-in-law to have. You don't need to worry about Weiniing. I've asked her about this before and she told me that she doesn't mind. She said she's still happy as long as she has a place in your heart. A headache struck Tang Xiu, and he directly drilled his way out of the topic and said while heading inside, "Please don't worry about our affairs, Mom. Anyway, Dad should be upstairs, right? I'm gonna see him first." Hey, you brat. Su Lingyun was vexed and glared at Tang Xiu's back with annoyance. Then, she pulled Gu Yan and walked inside while muttering something. When Tang Xiu came to the second floor, he saw Tang Yunda leaning on the wall with a cigarette in his hand with a smile hanging on his face. He obviously had witnessed the amusing scene. Hey, Dad. Tang Xiu called out with a bitter smile. Tang Yunda chuckled and grinningly said, "You really didn't inherit my good quality at being faithful, brat. Speaking of which, your mom would have run to the exquisite pagoda and forced you to marry and have children if it wasn't for me stopping her." Tang Xiu bitterly smiled. In actuality, I wasn't like doing it before. Tang Yunda raised his hand and smilingly said, "Nah. No need to explain anything to me, boy. Besides, I'm not that anxious to have grandchildren either. On the contrary, your mom will definitely make you get headaches in the future about that. Further, all of your women are outstanding, and the emotional bonds between you and them will very likely cause you headaches." Tang Xiu forced out a bitter and wry smile yet again after hearing the schadenfreude sense from his own father. Let's say that I'll take one step at a time for those emotional issues. Besides, I don't have much time to deal with it right now. With the big endeavor I need to carry out, I must seize the time to develop my forces and improve my own strength. Tang Yunda shrugged and smilingly said, "Well, I can help with other things, but I can't help you on this one. Do your best, Sonny." Unwilling to lengthen the topic, Tang Xiu said, "Be that as it may, there's something I need to discuss with you, Dad. Let's talk about it in the study." "All right." Tang Yunda nodded. They could talk here if it was just an ordinary issue, but since his son asked him to discuss in the study, he understood that the issues might be very important. The 200-plus square meter study room had a luxurious interior and decorations. After the father and son took a seat, Tang Xiu took a cigarette box from his interspatial ring, gave Tang Yunda one and lit it, then took one for himself before opening the discussion. "Dad, we're leaving Earth for the Immortal in at most 2 years. We're going to develop ourselves there later, but there are tons of things we must accomplish here in these 2 years. The most urgent thing is to get revenge to pay off the old scores. It's time for us to repay the blood debt." Tang Yunda's complexion shifted and he immediately asked, "You mean, you're ready to strike House Dolan?" "Yeah, but not only House Dolan." Tang Xiu nodded. "Those top 3 organizations in the world as well as the world's first intelligence agency, the Dark Wind. They are like evil tumors. If we don't exterminate these organizations and clans, it's very likely that they will cause a big mess in the future." Incredulity on his face, Tang Yunda murmured, "How is it possible to achieve this, Xiu? Those organizations and clans have deep heritage and only one word can describe them: terrifying." Can our Tang sect deal with these many organizations and clans at the same time? Dad, let alone these organizations and clans, Tang sect can easily conquer the whole world if they are also our enemies. Besides, there's also another purpose that I'd like to accomplish. To begin with, Tang Xiu replied confidently. What's that purpose, exactly? Tang Yunda asked curiously. It's about the 200,000 children in the army, Tang Xiu said slowly. They now possess formidable strength, so I need to find enemies for them to train them as soldiers. Afterward, I want to form the Tang sect army. You mean, you're going to dispatch those children to deal with the 4 major organizations and House Dolan? Tang Yunda was shocked. No. Absolutely not. They are too young, the oldest among them is just a 17-year-old teenager. You're just pushing them to their deaths if you dispatch them. This is something you don't understand, Dad, Tang Xiu went on. The flowers in the greenhouse can never withstand the wind and rain. The immortal world is anything but great. It's a brutal place with many intrigues, wars, and killings nearly everywhere. Children must undergo brutal training and fighting the moment they're able to think. That world is an inhuman place where immortals devour each other, and only those who hone and sharpen themselves to be sharp blades can survive and live longer. But Tang Yunda wanted to keep arguing. However, Tang Xiu raised his hand to interrupt him and said, You also know that uncut jades are worthless, and steel won't be made without throughout tempering. The enemies we're going to face in the future are extremely powerful, and if they can't grow up quickly now, they will only meet their deaths in the future in the hands of these enemies. Who exactly are our enemies, Xiu? Asked Tang Yunda hurriedly. Tang Xiu thought for a moment, but then slowly shook his head and said, It's not yet the time to tell you about that, Dad. What you need to do now is to go all out to cultivate and strive to break through to a higher realm earlier. The immortal world is the place where the strong is revered. If we don't want to get trampled and die under the enemy's butcher knife, we must seize the time to make ourselves stronger. Further, I'll also need your help on this one in the future. Chapter 1252, The Founding of the Great Tang Empire. Tang Yunda nodded and said in a deep voice, Blood brothers are those who can rely on when fighting a tiger, while father and son must unite when fighting in the war. I won't be your burden no matter who the enemies are. I'll fight alongside you. I'm looking forward to the day when you and I fight side by side, Dad, replied Tang Xiu with a smile. Tang Yunda was well aware of his own strength and how fearsomely powerful his son was. He had made up his mind inwardly that he must go all out in cultivation in the future. Regardless of whether he could catch up with his son in a short time, he swore not to be left behind too far. He smoked the cigarette, tilted up his head and said, By the way, I'll contact your 2 uncles immediately to tell them about this matter. They have waited for nearly 3 decades for revenge. I'll tell them to get prepped quickly. No rushing, Dad, said Tang Xiu hurriedly. Why? Tang Yunda stared blankly and was bewildered. I fully trust the 2 uncles, but I can't guarantee the rest around them not serving the interest of outsiders. Tang Xiu said, If you were to tell them situation now and their men leak it out, we can expect trouble. You're right. Tang Yunda nodded. Then I'll wait for a while before telling them. The cold breeze lingered on the vast sea, while the 9 Dragons Island was covered in warm, spring-like weather. On the 3rd day of the secret discussion between Tang Xiu and his father, a bright moon hung in the night sky and sprayed its light to illuminate some parts of the world. At the center of the island, in a hall large enough to accommodate tens of thousands of people, all Tang sect disciples had been summoned back. Even disciples who carrying out important missions around the world had rushed back at this time. The meeting hall was deadly silent, and hundreds of high-ranking disciples of Tang sect were watching Tang Xiu, who sat on the podium silently, waiting for the important announcement that was about to be made by him. Strictly speaking, it was not at all mistaken. They were all people with brains. Such a summon meant that sect master Tang Xiu had something important to announce since there had been no precedent, of such a meeting ever since the founding of Tang sect. Everyone has arrived, Grand Master. Gu Xiaoxue, who stood by the podium, placed her right fist on her left chest and reported respectfully. Tang Shou slowly nodded. He then stood straight and slowly swept across everyone's faces in the hall before his eyes finally landed on Gu Yan's face, who then slightly nodded at him in response. Afterward, Tang Shou took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "There are few things I'll announce this time. And one of them is that I declare the complete disappearance of Tang sect from now onwards." What? The hundreds of high-ranking disciples of Tang sect wore disbelieving faces. I've discussed this decision with Gu Yan and thus, decided to dissolve Tang sect in order to establish a new force. From now henceforth, we will be known as the Great Tang Empire. Tang Xiu went on in a deep voice. The Great Tang Empire? Everyone's hearts shook as their eyes fixedly stared at Tang Xiu, wanting to know what other shocking news Tang Xiu would say next. Further, I've decided to set a 2-year time deadline before we leave Earth for the immortal world. Tang Xiu continued, therefore, it will be the flag of the Great Tang Empire that will enter the immortal world, the place we're going to live 2 years later. Could you elaborate about the founding of the Great Tang Empire, Grand Master? Asked Gu Xiaoxue respectfully. Tang Xiu nodded in response and said, for now, I'll inform you about the structure of the Great Tang Empire. The empire will be divided into 6 bodies of authorities. They are, respectively, the Ministry of Military Affairs, the Ministry of Political Affairs, the Ministry of Intelligence, the Ministry of Execution, the Ministry of Finance, and lastly, the Celestial Monster Pavilion. Next is the personnel appointment. The Ministry of Military Affairs consists of 4 major army groups, namely, Dragon, Tiger, Sparrow, and Martial Corps. Tang Guang will assume command of the Dragon Army, Mo Ao will lead the Tiger Army, Hao Lei will be the commander of the Sparrow Army, and Chen Xiaohua will command the Martial Army. These 4 major armies will be responsible to guard the territory occupied by the Great Tang Empire in the immortal world in the future, and they are to be stationed in the 4 regions in the east, south, west, and north of the territory, respectively. The Ministry of Political Affairs will be headed by Tang Yunpeng as the head and Mo An as his deputy. You both are responsible to manage the imperial government affairs and lead the subjects of the great empire into prosperity and thriving lives. The Ministry of Intelligence will be managed by Jin Shi and Yi Shi-san, where Yi Shi-san will act as a deputy to assist Jin Shi in establishing an intelligence network. The network must be centered on the territory of the Great Tang Empire and then to be expanded in all directions. I hope that the intelligence of the Ministry of Intelligence enters all levels of society all over the immortal world. Tang An will assume command of the Ministry of Execution, along with Feng Yang and Shui Gui as deputies. Keep in mind that I need a batch of killing machines who can disappear without a trace and stay invisible. I hope that the enemies we're going to face in the future will all be neutralized by you silently. As for the head of the Ministry of Finance, it will be assumed by Gu Xiaoxue, and Tang Min will act as her deputy. You're in control of the finance and treasury of the Great Tang Empire. The empire will never develop without the assistance of enormous financial resources and treasury, so I hope that you both can manage the affairs well. You must strive not to let the Great Tang Empire lack the supply of cultivation resources. Lastly, Tang Nu will hold the position of the Celestial Monster Pavilion's head along with Star Devourer Insect. The 35,680 great monsters will be under your command, all of whom are responsible to guard the holy land of our Great Tang Empire and to eradicate all the powerful enemies, with all your power whenever we encounter a crisis. After Tang Xiu announced up to this point, his expression became stern and asked in a deep voice, "Tell me, are you all up for these responsibilities?" Drap. All the people whose names were mentioned got up from their chairs and shouted, "Yes, sir." Tang Xiu nodded with satisfaction and continued, "I'd like to emphasize on the 4 corps next. In the following days, I want all the 200,000 children soldiers to be incorporated into the 4 corps. Each corp will consist of 50,000 of them. For the next 2 years, I'll choose the enemies you're going to face as a short trail and training to showcase all your capabilities and talents. The targets are the world's top 3 organizations, as well as the Darkwind and House Dolan. I'll also set up a commander hall for the next 2 years to train commanders-in-chief for the Minister of Military Affairs. The 4 of you don't need to worry since I'll preside over the training of these people personally, and they will definitely be able to display acceptable capabilities for you. The meeting lasted for 4 hours. At the end of the meeting, Gu Xiaoxue walked to the podium and respectfully said, "There are 2 questions I'd like to ask, Grand Master." "Do ask," Tang Shou nodded. "Since we are going to establish the Great Tang Empire, we can't be just a group of people without a leader, I suppose. You've already appointed the personnel in the ranks, but no one has taken over the sovereign position of the Great Tang Empire," Gu Xiaoxue said. Mo Odd got up from his chair and said in a deep voice, "Gu Xiaoxue, I don't think it's necessary to ask about this issue, because Sect Master is the only person qualified to be the sovereign of the Great Tang Empire." "That's right." Hundreds of Tang sect disciples stood up and shouted while staring at Tang Shou enthusiastically. Tang Shou raised his hand and smilingly said, "We're all very close, so I won't hide it. I'll become the first sovereign of the Great Tang Empire." A smile appeared on Gu Xiaoxue's mouth, then she said aloud smilingly, "Since our Great Tang Empire already has an emperor, then should we also have the Emperor Harem Palace?" The eyes of Su Lingyun, who was sitting on a chair in the conference hall, suddenly lit up. She looked at Gu Xiaoxue's expression and a joyful look slowly appeared on her face. As she got up and went towards Gu Xiaoxue, she gently hugged her and seriously said, "We won't interfere too much with your relationship affairs and whatnot, Xiao. But I'm still your mother, and I've been hoping to see you get married. An emperor will need wives and concubines since we need a male offspring, to begin with." This? Tang Shou glared at Gu Xiaoxue angrily, but his expression quickly turned into a bitter one as he replied to his mother with a forced smile. "Mother, this is an issue we need to discuss privately in the future." "No. You also know what an empire means, don't you?" Su Lingyun replied categorically, "An empire must have an emperor, a chamber of imperial wives and concubines, and male offspring who will inherit the empire in the future. Xiao, if you don't have time to solve the harem problem, then leave it to Mom. Rest assured, Mom won't find you women randomly, but those who are willing to follow you in life and death. You must give these women who have been with you a legal status, and you must never abandon them." Tang Shou fell into silence since he was well aware that his mother was right. These women had been with him over the years silently. They kept supporting him without any complaints or regrets, even regarding his life as higher than their own. Now that the empire had been founded, he would indeed cross the line if he didn't give them legal status. Tang Shou slowly raised his head and said, "I'm willing to give this status, Mother. We'll have a proper discussion about this issue later. My daughter-in-law needs my approval." Su Lingyun insisted. "Xiao, you're a man who has accomplished and keeps doing big things, so I'm going to help you solve this issue. I'll never give status to those who are not your woman, but I must give it to those who have become your soul mates." Tang Shou was really unable to refute. He didn't want to disobey his mother's intentions either. Although he didn't want his mother to intervene in this matter, he was well aware of how bad he was in dealing with these relationship issues. Finally, he could only give his consent on this matter perfunctorily. However, he secretly made up his mind that if his mother were to find some unfamiliar women besides those whom he was familiar with, he would never agree to accept them. The meeting then ended and he left tons of trivial matters to Gu Yan and Gu Xiaoxue since he needed to take Mo Ao and the rest to organize the 4 major corps. The moon sent its misted moonlight. In the living room on the 2nd floor of the palace, Su Lingyun held Gu Xiaoxue's hand. A smile was hanging on her graceful face as she said, "Xiaoxue, you're really my best child. Had you not finally stood up on this matter, I'm afraid that stupid boy would keep feeling reluctant to solve his problems with his women until now." Alas, it would have been great if you were also my daughter-in-law. Gu Xiaoxue's smiling face suddenly froze, but an extraordinary splendor suddenly glittered in her eyes. Tang Xiu's and Gu Yan's faces kept appearing in her mind and triggered a struggle in her heart. Finally, after the continuous alternations in her feelings, she gritted her teeth and said, in actuality, I'd love it if I can. Chapter 1253, Candidates with Ulterior Motives. Come again? Su Lingyun zoned out for a moment and her eyes turned wide. As she saw Gu Xiaoxue lower her head and blush from ear to ear, she suddenly realized something, patted her hand and laughed. Great, great, great. Xiaoxue, it's truly a blessing for Xiao to think that he can obtain your care. Having said that, she immediately took the red register book next to her and wrote Gu Yan's name on the first page, and then Gu Xiaoxue's on the second page. Gu Xiaoxue's mouth opened, but she swallowed back what she wanted to say. Putting down the register book, Su Lingyun then looked up at Gu Xiaoxue and said, I understand your concerns, Xiaoxue. Xiao is your grandmaster according to seniority. However, I think those who cultivate on the path of immortality don't need to stick to such a trivial thing anymore. Your master can become Xiao's woman, so why can't you? I, too, have always thought that hierarchical seniority was important, but now I understand that as long as you sincerely love someone, what does it matter the gap in generations when it comes to someone you love? Just put down the concern in your heart, I'll speak to Yan later. Gu Xiaoxue lowered her head while her face turned redder. Su Lingyun grabbed her hand and smilingly said, Xiaoxue, the reason I called you is that I need you to give me some recommendations to write some names in this register. You're quite close to Xiao, so you should know some of them. Gu Xiaoxue hesitated before nodding gently. I do know some of them. Su Lingyu's eyes lit up. She immediately nodded and said, Tell me. I'll write their names here. Kang Xia, Mu Weining, and Ouyang Lulu. You should also know the relationship between these three with Grandmaster, Gu Xiaoxue said. While registering the names, Su Lingyun said, Don't address Xiao as Grandmaster anymore, Xiaoxue. Just call his name directly. I know these three girls and am very familiar with them too. Who else aside from them? Shui Yu, Gu Xiaoxue added. Su Lingyun's smile became a bit thicker as she wrote Shui Yu's name on the 6th page. She then asked again, Are there more? Gu Xiaoxue hesitated for a moment and then said, Zhang Xinya and Zhang Xinyue. Su Lingyun wrote their names on the 7th and 8th pages. Then, she nodded and said, I love those twin sisters. I do. Xinya used to be a big star and quite a famous goddess in the eyes of many people. I heard that Xinyue is also an outstanding woman. She found and runs her own business and earns herself a great life. Do you know anyone else? Gu Xiaoxue shook her head and said, I have no idea about the others. Su Lingyun nodded contentedly and then said, 8 candidates. Even though the number is a far cry compared to the 3 palaces and 6 chambers which housed 72 imperial concubines, in ancient times, it's already a lot for Xiao. Suddenly, the door was knocked and a small head poked out. When the female saw Su Lingyun and Gu Xiaoxue inside, a bright smile appeared on the delicate and lovely face and she pushed the door and walked inside. After quickly approaching Su Lingyu, she chuckled and said, Auntie, I went to Europe a few days ago and bought a Chanel bag for you. Please take a look and see whether you like it. Went to Europe and bought a Chanel bag a few days ago? Su Lingyun and Gu Xiaoxue exchanged glances, and both of them were at a loss whether they had to cry or laugh. Andy had been on 9 Dragon Islands for more than half a year. How come she went to Europe a few days ago? That was simply nonsense, though that Chanel bag was indeed beautiful. Su Lingyun and Gu Xiaoxue held back their urges to chuckle and smile. They could see Andy's face that clearly portrayed her ulterior motive. Su Lingyun just received the handbag from her and happily nodded with a smile. That's very nice of you. This is a beautiful bag, and many others will definitely envy me when I go shopping later. Thanks, Andy. Please, never mind it. It's just my filial piety towards you, Andy hurriedly said. Filial piety? Well, it does look like filial piety. Thinking about it deeply with a happy mood, Su Lingyun then said, well, I'm currently discussing the list of candidates for Xiu's harem, Andy. I've already written Kong Xia's name. Do you have any other name I can list? Andy hurriedly squatted and held Su Lingyun's name and replied smilingly, why don't you write my name, Auntie? It'd be my pleasure to have my name listed. Pfft. Su Lingyun couldn't help laughing out loud, while Gu Xiaoxue was at a loss whether she had to cry or laugh, looking at Andy with admiration. She's really bold, daring to love and face regret alike. In this regard, Gu Xiaoxue admitted that she was really far from being Andy's match. Su Lingyun grabbed the register with a smile and wrote Andy's name on the 9th page. Then, she smilingly asked, how about now? Are you now happy? N. So glad and satisfied. Thanks, Mom. A bright smile plastered Andy's exquisite and lovely face as she nodded repeatedly. Mom? The happy smile on Su Lingyun's face became more brilliant, while Gu Xiaoxue next to her secretly raised her thumbs up when Su Lingyun didn't notice. Such a quick change of addressing, that was so goddamn fast. After a while, Andy left the room happily and the door was knocked again when Gu Xiaoxue was about to leave. Wearing her usual black robe but without her usual mask, Tang An walked inside with her supple black hair fluttering and brought a bowl of 8 precious lotus seed soup. As she casually came to Su Lingyun's front, she gently glanced at Gu Xiaoxue, smiled, and then spoke to Su Lingyun softly. I haven't seen you having dinner tonight, so I brought this 8 precious lotus seed soup for you from the kitchen. Would you like to have it? Having said that, however, Tang An's blushed a bit. Su Lingyun cast a suspicious look and hesitated. Who are you, miss? I'm Tang An, Tang An replied softly. Tang An? Although Su Lingyun had seen Tang An many times, this was her first time seeing her true face. She never dreamed that Tang An was such a peerless, soul-stirring beauty. However, the first thought that came to Su Lingyun's mind was pity. Such a beautiful girl, yet she had never dressed up properly and always wore a black robe and even put on a bronze mask on her face. All right, I'll drink it. I am especially fond of this 8 precious lotus seed soup. It was just not long ago since Su Lingyun had a meal, but she didn't reveal to Tang An and took the bowl of soup and drank half of it before she put it on the tea table. Afterward, she grabbed Tang An's hand and pulled her to sit next to her. Her other hand took the register book and then asked in a soft voice, there are 9 names already written on this register. Would you like me to add your name to it? Tang An tilted up her head and secretly glanced at Gu Xiaoxue. The latter wore a playful and teasing look on her face and made her heart weaken. She immediately lowered her head and blushed from ear to ear and then slightly nodded. Su Lingyun's smile was especially brilliant, and she opened the 10th page to write Tang An's name on it. Then, she smilingly said, call me mother later, got it? N. The redness on Tang An's face turned redder just like a fiery glowing sun as she nodded gently. Suddenly, she looked up at Su Lingyun and said, Mother. See, could you write another name? Whose name? Su Lingyun was puzzled. Gongwan, Tang An said. Su Lingyun was surprised. Do Gongwan and Xiu have this kind of? No. But the feelings can be developed slowly in the future. Tang An shook her head and said, however, Gongwan's constitution is very special and will be very beneficial to Grandmaster's cultivation. Did she give her consent on this matter, though? Su Lingyun hesitated. I've talked with her about this matter and she also likes Grandmaster very much, Tang An said. She said that she has never seen a better man than Grandmaster in her life. If so, then I'll put her on the list too, Su Lingyun said. But little In, you're not to address Xiao as Grand Master again later. Just call his name directly. About this, all right. Tang En gently nodded. A few minutes later, after Tang En left, Gu Xiaoxue, who had long endured her hot, embarrassed feeling, saying, Mother, would you like to rest or would you like me to stay with you to chat? That's exactly my intention, child. Su Lingyun chuckled and said, well, Andy and Tang En have come. I wonder who is going to come next. Outside the palace. Kawako had obviously spent time dressing up intentionally. Her long gown fluttered and she put on various jewelry as she stood at the front door of the place. Being stared at by the two guards outside the door, she couldn't help but feel a hot, burning feeling on her face, wishing that she could find a burrow to drill into and hide. Huh? Suddenly, her expression shifted and she looked at a beautiful woman whose beauty could ruin a country. The belle who just came out from the inside made her feel incredulous. The aura of this peerless beauty was quite erratic at this time and turned out to be Tang En? She. Kawako blocked Tang En's path and asked, aren't you Tang En?
Yeah.
Tang En gently nodded. Kawako's eyes shifted to the interior behind the palace's door and hesitated. Then, she asked, you were inside, for registration. Tang En replied lightly with one word. Her figure then flickered and she instantly vanished. Register? Kawako seemed to become aware of something and no longer hesitated. She flew into the palace and then came to the second floor. Just as she was about to stop an envoy inside to inquire Su Lingyun's whereabouts, she suddenly noticed Viviani standing on the corridor. You too. Kawako came to Viviani and asked in surprise. I'm a bit scared. Viviani forced a smile. How could Kawako not have any fear? Just a while ago, she kept holding on for a few minutes, standing outside the palace door and hesitating. If it wasn't for Tang En, she wouldn't have the courage to come inside. Looking at the bitter and forced smile on Viviani's face, Kawako suddenly felt certain about something and let out a smile. Afterward, she pulled her hand and said, actually, I'm also a bit scared just like you. But Tang En has been here, do you think we still need to feel scared? But, what if? Sect, he's not interested in us. What should we do? Viviani hesitated. I've long observed and inquired his stance on this matter. He never actively pursued any woman, whether they are Kongxia, Ouyang Lulu, Mu Weining, or Shuiyu. They were all the ones who seized the initiative to pursue him. If they can do it, why can't we? Besides, I don't think we lose out to them, be it our looks, figures, bearings, and cultivation levels, to begin with. Chapter 1254, Mischievous Stunts. In the living room, Su Lingyun and Gu Xiaoxue had stopped chatting. Both of them had quite a remarkable cultivation level, so they could clearly hear the conversation in the corridor outside. Gu Xiaoxue herself was even able to distinguish the two familiar voices belonging to Kawako and Viviani. Creak. The door was gently knocked twice before it was pushed open from the outside. As Kawako and Viviani appeared at the door, Su Lingyun got up with a bright smile on her gorgeous face. The two females then came to her and she smilingly said, I overheard you. You both are good girls, and none of you is worse than the rest of them. I myself am very happy for Xiao since he got the love from you both. Auntie. Kawako opened her mouth but was unable to say anything due to shyness. While holding their hands, Su Lingyun smilingly said, you don't need to say more. I already know what you have been harboring in mind. Later on, you both should also call me mother just like the rest. This? Kawako and Viviani looked at each other and eventually called mother intimately. With a beaming, happy face, Su Lingyun said, you both are also my daughters-in-law since you called me mother. I won't discriminate any of you based on your nationality or race. From now on, you both are the mothers of the great Tang Empire as well. Having said that, she loosened her grip on their hands, took the register and then wrote their names. After a while, the two females left with happy faces. Su Lingyun watched their backs as they left and closed the door. Afterward, she turned to Gu Xiaoxue and smilingly said, Xiaoxue, Xiao is really blessed in this life as he can get the love from outstanding girls like you. Relax. Mom will definitely teach him well if he bullies you in the future. Finding herself a formidable backer all of a sudden, Gu Xiaoxue chuckled and grinningly said, I'll also treat Tang Xiu well, mother. The moment after, Su Lingyun and Gu Xiaoxue stayed in the living room for 3 hours more before they left since no one else came. In a forested hill under the moonlight, Kang Xia was sitting and leaning on a tree with her arms hugging her legs. A faint smile painted her face while Tang Xiu sat cross-legged next to her on a big blue stone wearing a complex expression. Why the long face? Asked Kang Xia as she took back her vision from the palace and turned to Tang Xiu. You think I should be happy with how things are happening? Tang Xiu forced a wry smile and said, I owe so many sentiments and love. I don't know how I should repay these debts in the future. And Mom makes it worse, making me more depressed with her mischievous stunts. Why would she open such registration, and what makes it different from those emperors of ancient times? You tell me. Kang Xia grinningly teased. The founding of the great empire itself and with you as the sovereign, which one is any different from those emperors in ancient times? Tang Xiu rolled his eyes in response and snappily said, Of course it's different. Big time, actually. Those ancient feudalists regarded women as a second-class group, while some men with unremarkable capital can still have a larger number of wives and concubines, following their emperors, who housed their wives and concubines in 3 palaces and 6 chambers. What age we're living now and why should we retain such an idea? Marrying so many women will definitely make me die twisted and exhausted, no? Pfft. Kang Xia mockingly grinned and laughed at it in response. You know, you really got it cheap and convenient for you, right? Be that as it may, I still really don't want to have such convenience, Tang Xiu reluctantly said. Kang Xiu's smile receded and she seriously said, Don't tell me you don't get why Mother is solving your love life problems? She understands how big the endeavor you're going to shoulder is, so she's making a quick cut to clear up the mess with your love life. She is willing to help you give a status to the women who like and care about you into your harem. She even went so far as to help you directly exclude some other women who don't deserve it. As a smart man, it wasn't like Tang Xiu was unable to understand the situation. It was also the reason he gave his consent to his mother to solve this matter and just took a wait-and-see stance. And yet, how come Andy, Tangin, Gongwan, Viviani, and Kawako were also included? Even Gu Xiaoxue must also be included on the list. Isn't that the same as pulling out some mischievous stunts? Suddenly, he turned to look at Kang Xia and asked, Don't tell me you're not disturbed by this all? I'll be lying if I say I don't feel anything. Kang Xia shook her head and went on, Everyone has some degree of selfishness, especially when it comes to partners. But I'm perfectly aware of how brilliant and dazzling you are. You're too brilliant, it's impossible to have you for my own. But no matter how unwilling, bitter, and painful it is for me, I can only suppress such feelings and hold back. I don't want to lose you. I can only hope there's a place for me in your heart, what I'm sure they have in mind as well. Tang Xiu gently raised his hand as a wisp of energy wrapped Kang Xia, who didn't resist, and pulled her into his arms. He raised her arms and stroked her soft beautiful hair gently and said with an apologetic, guilty face, I'm sorry for everything. You don't need to be sorry to me or anyone else. Kang Xia shook her head and said, It's a choice all of us made and has nothing to do with you. However, I admit that aside from being your woman, I also want to become a medicine for you. What do you mean? Tang Xiu's hand stopped and a bewildered look appeared on his handsome face. Leaning gently on Tang Xiu's chest, Kang Xia softly said, I've long been aware that you've been wounded deep inside, so I want to turn myself into a medicine that can heal your broken heart. If you still can't let it go, you can still go look for her. I know how deep she has been engraved in your heart that, even a dozen of us added up won't be enough to compare to her position in your heart. Tang Shou's complexion turned frosty and he shook his head. Kang Xia, I've already cleared up my mind on this matter. The love I had for her was gone the moment she ambushed me, and what's left is regret and hatred. I've already cut a line between me and her from the moment I told her that I'll walk on my own as does she on her own path. We'll never go back and never have any intersection anymore. Kang Xia looked up, and her bright eyes stared at Tang Shou fixedly and emphasized each and every word as she spoke. Then from where that hate comes from if you don't love her anymore? You have too soft of a heart, especially when you face your former love. You just simply can't let it go. You wouldn't have been thinking about revenge, forming a force, and returning to the immortal world otherwise. Besides, do you know what I like most about you? What? Tang Shou deeply frowned but didn't argue. It's your kindness, though it's most likely due to your tender and soft heart, Kang Xia said. You would have stabbed her heart with your sword already the moment you figured out all the reasons. You would have definitely scattered her soul and made her forever vanish from your heart. Is this what it really turns out to be? Tang Shou spaced out and looked blank. A complicated look appeared in his eyes and grew more intense the longer this thought filled his mind. It was something he was reluctant to admit, yet he was perfectly aware of how true it was, as this was truly the genuine portrayal harbored in his heart. There was, indeed, a part of his heart that could never let her go. The affection that had lasted for millenniums, and all the good things that had happened between them was something that seemed to have been branded deep inside his heart. All those memories had become the lasting marks in his heart which he could never able to erase no matter how hard he tried. I'm going back to China after some time, Tang Shou suddenly said. Do you want me to accompany you? Asked Kang Xia. No, Tang Shou shook his head and said, I'm not just taking a break during my return to the mainland this time, but I also need to see the progress of the base being built by the Chinese authority. If anything, I may not be able to do much, but at least before I leave, I hope I can see that humanity on Earth has the ability to protect themselves when facing enemies in the future, no matter how minuscule it is. I'm also updated with this base in China, Kang Xia replied. Duanmu Lin is presiding over the site and the progress is great since authorities have been mobilizing all the state apparatus for the operation and continuously transporting a large number of materials there. Our magnificent Tang Corporation just provided $10 billion last year to aid the country. If my guess is correct, the first starship should be built soon. What about confidentiality? Tang Shou asked. The secrecy measures have been perfected and each group from the army has assigned an elite force to establish shadow guards to be stationed in nearly every corner of the country. Kang Xia went on, other than that, our intel department has been secretly monitoring the situation and providing assistance in the dark. No country has noticed this base in China, though the rivalries between China and various countries all over the world have been growing more intense for the last 3 years. Especially after the Aeroglider was sold on the market, various countries began eyeing the high-tech technology of the magnificent Tang Corporation. I've long expected such a situation, though, Tang Shou said. Well, even though the struggles between China and other countries in the world have been intensifying, the cultivation forces in other countries became very wary of Chinese practitioners, especially after our Tang sect destroyed the Celestial Wizard clan and made them rather afraid. Hence, it caused the intel operatives infiltrated in China to stay very low-key and reduced in strength. As the adage says, it's difficult for a mountain to accommodate 2 tigers or more, Tang Shou said. Earth is so small yet it has 200 countries, give or take. The number of countries is just ridiculous and against the natural law of survival for higher civilizations, to begin with. What I can do is make China formidable and become the most powerful country in the world and able to control the fate of mankind on Earth in the future. If in the future those who hold the power in China are far-sighted, broad-minded, and are able to disregard the division in nationality and races, mankind could finally form a new system of power that can unite the entire humanity on Earth, and completely integrate to form a new and solid higher civilization system. Kang Xia hesitated and asked, "Are we really not coming back here in the future?" "We will be able to come back, though it won't be doable so soon," Tang Shou said. "Maybe it will take us centuries, several millenniums, or tens of thousands of years. No one knows what the future holds." Chapter 1255, Back to Shanghai. Time slipped away and passed quickly. Half a month after Tang sect changed its name to Great Tang Empire, Tang Shou felt like his daily life became deeply harrowing. The harem registration stunt his mother pulled and the names of the ladies listed on it had been spread out, and known to all members of the Great Tang Empire. The most distressing part was the fact that even the lady protagonists stated on different occasions and at different times that it was a great honor for them to be registered as harem members of the Great Tang Empire. There were also some others involved, but one that Tang Shou had never imagined was Gong Wan. She made a statement that she would be faithful and follow the man she married no matter who he was, and getting married to the sovereign was truly a blessing. Thus, the sudden appearance of the Great Tang Empire's 13 first ladies. During the last half a month, Tang Shou spent his daytime busy forming 4 major regiments and carried out the drills and instructions for them on a daily basis, whereas he spent the nights accompanying the ladies. Even if he just accompanied them and did nothing else, he couldn't help but feel like he was sitting on pins and needles. "I gotta run away." Eventually, he finally gave in and just left a message to Gu Yan and hurriedly set off to Shanghai on a plane. The airport on Nine Dragons Island had been improved during the last 2 years. Development and even flight routes from various countries had been running for some time. Therefore, Tang Shou no longer had to take a flight from Saipan. In a private jet flying amid the clouds, Tang Shou sipped fine wine with a slight smile on the corner of his mouth. Only now could he finally relax. "Master." Tang Alung came out of the cockpit while holding a thermos pot and put it in front of Tang Shou. A grin on his face, he said, "Madame Xiaoxue said that porridge works well for stomach and must be served and eaten early. She also said that taking the soup will be great for your body, so Madame Xiaoxue added some congee, saying that not only will it scrape off your fat but also nourish your body and health." "That's right. She also said that you've worked hard for half a month and there are some medicines for your kidney added in the 8 precious lotus seed soup, as well. She said that it will be very great for you." Working hard? Tang Shou could only feel his scalp going numb. Thinking about it, he indeed worked hard for half a month. Especially because of Kang Xia, Ouyang Lulu, Mu Weining, and Shui Yu. These 4 women who accompanied him for 4 nights and simply turned into hungry wolves and tigers. Put this matter off, got it. Tang Shou then took an array manual he had recently written from the interspatial ring and gave it to Tang Alung. Then, he said, "You've studied the art of war and familiarized yourself with battle tactics carried out in wars on Earth since ancient times. However, you're also a cultivator, so I'm taking you this time to relax and forget all those battle strategies in your head for a while to prepare to learn the warfare in the immortal world. This is a record of battle formations and arrays you will be studying later. You need to be proficient in various skills, and array formation is a very important field to study if you want to be the commander of the army." Tang Along received the arrays manual and took a seat in front of Tang Shou. After skimming 2 or 3 pages, his delicate face looked happy and pleasantly surprised. He had been diligently and tirelessly studying over the past 3 years, especially in regards to warfare in ancient times and modern times on Earth. Occasionally, he also stayed in the library pavilion to read books about arrays and battle formations, so he had a fair bit of knowledge on this aspect. Yet, he was sure that this battle formation manual was absolutely more profound than its counterparts in the Nine Dragons Islands Library Pavilion. Shanghai Airport. Right as Tang Shou stepped out of the cabin's door, he saw 2 cars parked near the ladder. Four big men came out of the cars the moment the doors opened and a smart and capable-looking female in a white suit came out. The female's name was Gao Beilei and she was the current general manager of Magnificent Tang Corporation. She was the person Kong Xia and Ouyang Lulu had repeatedly invited to join previously, a professional manager from the United States Wall Street. Tang Xiu himself had never met her in person, but he could recognize her at a glance since he had seen her photo. Boss. The four big men greeted respectfully as Tang Xiu stepped down the ladder. Gao Beilei quietly observed Tang Xiu. She had long been curious about this young man. She knew that the famous Kong Xia, as well as her good friend Ouyang Lulu, were this young man's woman, while to her, this young man was her boss. Hello, boss. I'm Gao Beilei. Tang Xiu stretched his hand out to shake hands with her, loosened it and then said, "This should be our first meeting. I'm glad you can join the Magnificent Tang Corporation and work for the company. I should give you a gift for this first meeting." Having said that, he took a jade pendant from his interspatial ring and handed it to her. "Put this on starting today. It will be great for you." Gao Beilei stared blankly. She didn't expect that the boss would present her a gift directly the first time she met him. However, after thinking for a while, she received it and smilingly said, "This is a quite late first meeting gift, isn't it, boss? But it's quite interesting, regardless. I've been working for 2.5 years for the Magnificent Tang Corporation, and I never thought that it would take such a long time to meet the big boss. This would be quite an unbelievable story if the other business people around the world were to hear it." Tang Xiu chuckled and said, "Well, let's just say that I don't care much about things in the market, so I let Kong Xia handle it and left everything in her hands. Regardless, I hold the same trust in you since they trust you too. Let's set off." It's been more than 2 years since the company's HQ was moved to Shanghai. I've never been there before. Gao Beilei nodded with a smile and personally opened the car's door for Tang Xiu. After Tang Xiu took a seat, she pondered for a moment and finally decided to sit in the front seat. She had learned about Tang Xiu through various channels for the last 2.5 years. Although she dared not say that she really understood Tang Xiu, she still knew a fair deal about him. Further, Tang Xiu was also one of the few people around the world she admired. After all, he was able to create the Magnificent Tang Corporation before his 20s. He even had the ability to pull Kong Xia to work for him. Aside from that, nearly all the products produced by the Magnificent Tang Corporation came from his hands, all of which could cause a huge sensation in the business sector. As of today, the Magnificent Tang Corporation's assets had already exceeded 1 trillion yuan. But what she admired the most was the set of rules Tang Xiu made previously and his decision not to list the company. Otherwise, the company's valuation could have been 10 times greater than its current valuation today. "Would you like to have a meal first, boss? Or would you like to see the financial statement? But your visit is rather sudden, so the financial department can only provide the financial statement from last year, as we have yet to compile the statement for this year." Sitting on the front seat, Gao Beilei turned and asked.
Nah.
"I'm not interested." Tang Xiu waved and said, "It's fine as long as the company can make enough money for me to spend. Let's have a meal first before heading to the industrial park. I also need to tend to some other things afterward. Anyways, Moe should be in the industrial park too, right? Has he been well in recent years?" Professor Mo has indeed been working in the research institute inside the industrial park. Gao Beilei nodded and said, "His health is great, and he keeps looking younger even though he has a very heavy workload and schedule." "That's great to hear." Tang Xiu nodded. The two cars left the airport and entered the highway less than 10 minutes after. Tang Xiu then saw the new sight in the surrounding in the sky. Many people were standing on aerogliders and flying fast. Some were flying alone, some looked like couples, and husbands and wives hugging or holding hands while flying. Further, the interesting thing was that they were flying on certain flight routes and followed fixed routes above the roads. After a few minutes of observation, he saw at least hundreds of people flying on aerogliders, but to his surprise, none of them left the flying routes above the roads. So, how were the sales of the aeroglider? Tang Xiu took back his vision and asked. It's been great even though the aeroglider sales are kind of limited due to the limited number of the product. Gao Beilei nodded and explained, yet, the price is very high due to that as well, and we can only sell 1 million units annually. Thus, we only sold 2 million units in the last 2 years at home. We exported 20 million units overseas, so a total of 40 million units have been sold in 2 years. So far, the total number of the first-generation aeroglider sold by our company is 42 million units. Tang Xiu was secretly dumbstruck since he himself didn't expect that the aeroglider's sales volume would be this high. The revenue earned from selling 42 million units was simply an astronomical figure. By the way, what about the joint venture between us and Jin Xingkue? Tang Xiu suddenly asked. It has been finalized. The final net income is of 9.1 billion yuan, Gao Beilei answered. However, I decided not to withdraw the funds and invested in the new project instead. The new project itself has been starting to sell and the funds are flowing back. Jin Xingkue's Jinda estate just transferred 4.5 billion last night, while it is expected that they will gradually pay us a total amount of about 20 billion within the next 2 months. Tang Xiu nodded in response. He didn't care about these numbers and just asked casually since he remembered Jin Xingkue a moment ago. Gao Beilei turned and narrowed her eyes when she saw Tang Xiu fall into silence. After thinking for a while, she said, "Boss, our company is actually a bit short of money recently." Come again? Tang Xiu couldn't believe his ears for a moment. The magnificent Tang Corporation was definitely a money-making machine, yet, how could it be short of money now? Gao Beilei forced a smile and said, "The company's monthly revenue is calculated and summed up at the end of the month before the final statement is summarized. Except for the 10% monthly overhead of the company, the rest of the money is transferred. It's due to a big project I just started recently, so the company is now short of funds." What project is it exactly? Tang Xiu asked curiously. He originally thought that the magnificent Tang Corporation's coffer was brimming with money, so he could receive quite a big amount of money every day. It was rather unexpected to hear that the company was short of funds right as he returned to Shanghai and met the company's general manager.